Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, stories, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out the articles, videos, and more at passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, join the community forum, and of course, attend the weekly online Global Passive House Happy Hour. Now, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. My name is Matthew-Cutler Welsh. I'm coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zach Semke, and I'm in Seattle, Washington.
And you're enjoying some family time still there, Zach?
Yes. I've been asking very nicely for our two boys to keep it down on the other side of this door this little space.
If it works for NPR and various other podcasts that I listen to where there's dogs and children walking through, then, hey,
that's right.
A bit of that on the Passive House podcast is absolutely fine.
That's right. Yeah.
It all adds to the reality that we are all in, which is, it is what it is. How's things going over there?
They're good. We're getting like little glimmers of spring, which is really exciting. We're getting more sunlight, which is a hot commodity in Seattle. So it's good. Yeah. How about you?
Things are days are getting shorter here, starting to cool down. We'll be getting into autumn, as we call it, but fall. So starting to people think about getting ready for cooler days, but it's good. Our kids are back in school, so everything's sort of back to normal-ish.
But we are so jealous.
But as we've just talked about before, there's a lot of conversation about indoor air quality still, and people thinking about ventilation, in particularly around buildings and attached buildings. So there's a lot of stuff happening. And as always, housing in general, housing affordability, housing supply are all really big topics and continue to be big topics. My hope is that we can keep spreading the word of Passive House so that we keep explaining to people that quality is just as important as quantity, because we're not helping anyone in the long run if we build more and more really, really fast and it's not very good quality. And so part of my mission here, and I know it's similar in Australia and other parts of the world, is where there's a demand for housing, is that we keep encouraging those decision makers to consider not just building the bare minimum standard for those houses, which are often social houses or low income housing, but to really ramp it up and provide what I'm calling just fit for purpose housing. It doesn't have to be super high end, high performance. We're not building sports cars for people. We just want stuff that's actually healthy, dry, and comfortable.
Yeah. Well, I know in cities like Seattle, there's a tremendous scarcity of housing and real imbalance. And I gather that some of what's going on in New Zealand is actually driven by COVID, right? Like New Zealand is this.
Everyone's coming back.
Even.
Yeah. Everyone's back in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. We are getting this. We had what was labelled a housing crisis already, but it's certainly been exaggerated by lots of people returning, and that's really shooting up the market. And that's all well and good if you're returning here from, say, the US or Europe, and you're a professional with perhaps a young family. But what it does is push more and more of the bottom end of the market out of the market, and really puts pressure on everyone. Yeah. But as I like to say, in all this, demand is a good thing in the market world. It drives, should drive innovation, drive the market, and drive people towards creating more. It's just that we need to make sure that we're creating more of the right stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, let's get on to this week's episode. And before we do, we've got a few people to thank for bringing us the Passive House podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So the founding sponsors of Passive House Accelerator are 475 High Performance Building Supply, Backstinky Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minotaur, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, RDH Building Science, StoCorp, and Zola Windows. And our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA. So thanks to all of them for making this possible.
Absolutely. It's great to have that support. And for those outside America as well, there'd be some familiar brands in there. And even those that aren't directly available or services providers, they're doing some great stuff, which is all beneficial, not just in and around the US, but I know that a lot of people pay attention to some of those brands and some of those services all around the world as well. So that support is much appreciated. All right, let's get on to this week's interview. And we've got a bit of a focus for March. Is that right?
We do. Yeah. March is Women's Month at the Passive House Accelerator. And March 8th, we have a exciting summit called She Who Constructs. So we're building all of our programming around that theme, or at least the lion's share of it. So it's an exciting month coming up.
And to kick it off on the Passive House podcast, I spoke to Talina Edwards a while back, but it's very fitting to have this interview in the feed for the month of March. Some fantastic designers out there doing some really, really inspirational stuff. I've known Talina for a while. Talina and I have been exchanging emails, and she's been on a similar journey towards Passive House. It's been really exciting to watch that. So she's a Australia-based architect and has really embraced Passive House more recently after sort of learning more about it. She's always been really passionate about sustainability, and in fact she won a sustainability medal in 2019 for the Architeam Awards for a project which she talks about, the Owl Woods Passive House project. She also won in 2020 the Emerging Sustainable Architect Award. And she has recently joined the Passive House Association, the Australian Passive House Association, as Director of Partnerships and Major Events. As I said, she's passionate about sustainability. If you have a look on her website, you'll see that she talks about holistic design and also biophilic design. And I really like that she's come from that angle and has slotted Passive House into a bigger picture of overall sustainability. So let's jump into the interview. I started out by asking Talina about how she got into design and the building industry in the first place.
It's great to have you on the show. There are some people that I was convinced that I had already talked to and had an episode that I would refer back to, and you are definitely one of those people. And I think it's because I've been watching your progress and seeing some of your great work for a while now, and had just assumed that, of course, you've been on the show before. But it's great to finally have you here as a guest. So thank you.
No, thank you. I've been putting it off for a few years now, I think, because I had been listening to Homestyle Green from when I started my practice way back when. I was a dedicated podcast listener to your show, and that definitely helped shape my journey as well.
Yeah, well, let's start back then, way back when. What got you into architecture in the first place?
Oh, we're going way back.
Yeah.
I guess it was growing up in the outskirts of Melbourne it was sort of the leafy green and artistic community, bushy community of the Eltham area. So there was a the whole school of the mud brick community and passive solar was in that region. So as a child, I didn't really think much of it, but I feel that definitely had an influence. And my grandfather was a carpenter, my father graphic designer, and mum a draftsperson. So between the three of them, they built a renovation and extended our house when I was about 5. And I'm sure that definitely had an impact and that was also, solar passive design principles and thermal mass and getting orientation right to try and make a home a bit more comfortable. So I think all of that early on as a child definitely shaped, and had an influence, because I couldn't stop drawing floor plans, playing with Lego and dolls' houses, or that it sounds typical of many architects that I spent a lot of time doing that.
Yeah, nice. Well, and to have those influences of people just talking about that type of thing and drafting and then going, living through a renovation is a good source of inspiration. Yeah. So then it was off to study at Melbourne University?
That's right. So Melbourne Uni, I looked at a bunch of unis and that seemed to be the right fit at the time, and it was a really great education there. I was always sort of the odd one out, the greenie, or the person asking all the questions about where the sun was rising and setting and what indoor air quality was all about. All my friends falling asleep in the building science lectures because we'd spent the afternoon at the pub, and I'm saying, come on, we've got to listen to this stuff. It's about healthy environments. This is really important. So my ears were definitely pricking up way back then, and all my projects I tried to steer towards a more sustainable angle. It felt like the right thing to do.
So does that imply then that there was some component of sustainability in your degree at Melbourne?
Oh, I think it was very minimal from recollection. This is going back a couple of years now. I think it was mainly electives, to be honest. Like you would choose a design studio to purely focus on that. I don't know that there was an awful lot that was part of the general curriculum, maybe, 1 or 2 classes, but it was definitely not a whole subject or anything like that. So the indoor air quality came in when it was building services, and then again that was about 1 or 2 classes out of a whole subject. So it was very, very minor. Definitely knew nothing about thermal bridging back then, or passive, not certified passive house, not back then.
Well, and even thinking of air quality as a building services problem kind of puts it in the, give it to the engineers and just make sure that the plant is sized correctly, rather than actually the end goal of having a healthy indoor environment.
Yeah, correct. I think they mainly mentioned about sick building syndrome, but it wasn't a lot of detail. But I was definitely paying attention to, what does that mean and how do we avoid that?
Yeah. But it kind of sums up the state, I guess, in that particularly that era of sustainability being an elective. It's like, oh, you don't have to do that, but you could choose to do it if you want to.
That's right. Or it was just sort of skimmed over so quickly and then moving right along. And then it wasn't really brought back in at all. I recently reconnected with one of my design tutors from back then through the Architects Declare movement that I've been involved with. And it was really great. I found my old, sketchbook and notes from that particular design studio, which was absolutely all about sustainability. But that wasn't till 3rd or 4th year. And it was still my most memorable one, and where I learnt the most, because he is so passionate. A guy called Paul Ha. He's really been leading the industry for many years. A quiet achiever, but recently he was recognised for his contribution with research and better materials, essentially, is where he's at, and really good solar passive design.
Nice. So solar or passive solar, you mentioned that was what you were aware of, looking at thermal mass. Is that sort of where you went initially with design in practice when you graduated and started working?
Yeah, absolutely. That was what we knew as being sustainable. And I worked in a couple of small practices who did mud brick or rammed earth, natural materials or whatever it was, but all, I often say there's different ways of how people describe what sustainability means to them. It's a broad church in that way. So those small practices were excellent and I learnt a lot, but it was only when I had children, had a couple of kids, and we decided to pack up and move away from Melbourne and move to Ballarat to be closer to family. And I still had a 1-year-old, so I wasn't quite sure if I was ready to go back into work or whether I'd get a job with a local architect or what was my next step. I was still on leave. So I started just doing some more research, and all of a sudden a job landed in my lap, and I thought, well, hang on, I guess I'm starting a practice, because if you're going to do one job, you've got to do it properly.
Right, a job as in a...
Oh, sorry, as in a project.
A project as opposed to a...
Oh, sorry, yeah, not as in
an employment job.
No, sorry. As it often is, a extended family member wanted an extension on their home, and I didn't want to just get it wrong. I wanted to get it right. So, it started a practice, and at the same time I was giving talks to local community groups about sustainable design. So I was doing a lot of extra research into what that would mean for them, but also what it means for me, and started trying to craft my story and building a website. What do I stand for and what are my values? So it was a bit of a research and soul searching to start to put all that together. And it was at that time, when I was listening to podcasts and reading a lot of blogs, that I discovered Homestyle Green.
That's interesting. So the process of having to create an entity for yourself, create your own business and then a website, kind of forced you to think about what you stood for. Yeah,
absolutely, because I wanted to be able to attract clients that shared those same values. It was no point me attracting, say, a developer who wanted to do something really fast and really cheap and didn't necessarily care about quality, when that was sort of the complete opposite to what I believed in. I'm not saying that has to be really expensive, but I'm saying, we wanted to sort of take it slow. It's slow architecture. It's the slow food movement. You care about the nutrition of your building, I suppose.
Yeah, nice.
So it was how it has to be a little bit slower and thoughtful and taking that time to care. And therefore that can be costs more just because of the time, but it's about getting the quality right, which is what really it came down to. And quality in terms of that attention to detail with the sustainability side of things and the thermal envelope. Is, getting those details right, I wasn't willing to compromise on those. So it was a big, long journey learning about how to create a business, I suppose. It's not just opening a business. I wanted to create a practice that would bring the right sort of people.
Yeah, right. And so you got your first client because it was sort of a family, extended family, but that soon gets done. And I imagine starting a business, there'd be some anxiety to get more clients in the door, because you've got to sort of pay the bills and get things moving. Was it hard? Was it hard to stay really selective?
No, I don't think it was. I was, I suppose, in a fortunate position that I think, as I said, my second son was 1. My first son was 5, 2 boys. And so the first year I sort of worked 1 day, and then as he went to 2, I worked 2 days, and then 3 days, and it sort of was a slow progression, a slow build-up. So by the time he got to school at age 5, I felt like I'd had that slow transition, and I was ready to, really hit the ground running and ramp up the business. And it just sort of, it's a slow burn architecture, but certainly with kids we were in a position where that sort of worked best for our family, to just take it slowly, one step at a time. And it really did feel like every year it just ramped up that little bit more. And now I've got to the point where I don't know what's happening next year. because, it was that slow increase, and then moving, out away from the kitchen table, going to work in a co-working space with another architect, and then moving into my own studio and sharing. I invited in other co-workers, and then I had to get rid of some of them to bring in an employee. And now we're at a point that all the co-workers have gone, and there's 5 of us in the studio and working full-time. And, it's been that slow transition.
And have you been able to maintain your choice of clients?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, that was the question. Yes. We've always offered different levels of service. So we do sort of a smaller consultation around how to improve your home to make it more energy efficient as well. So there was always those smaller consultations early on, and we've done well over 100 of those.
Wow.
Now. And then those would then turn into, a bunch of those would turn into maybe doing sketch design services only, where people may not have otherwise come to an architect. It really gave them the overall holistic vision of what they wanted. But if they didn't have the full, the budget to stretch to full architectural services with the way we normally go into that detail, it was enough for them to go off directly to a builder or their drafty to carry the project through. So that was sort of a next step in, I suppose, these smaller services.
Right.
And it sort of moved more to the full architectural services, which we're mainly doing those now. But I suppose as the business grew, that was a really nice way to sort of offer those different levels of service that still was reaching clients who cared about quality and sustainability, even if their budget didn't stretch to the full service. So I haven't had to then, so to answer your question, I haven't had to sell my soul or work for anyone who I've really disagreed with, or I've learned to trust my gut an awful lot.
Yeah.
Really follow that intuition. There was a few times early on where a client, there was something not quite right, and it took a little while to learn that, and now I can pick it up really quickly if they're on the same page and it's a hell yeah, we're going to do this, and there's that sense of excitement about it. Or if there's all of a sudden that clenching in the guts and you're like, yeah, something doesn't feel right, it's really quick to pick up on that now. It's a great skill.
And what do you do? What do you do in that instance? Do you send them down the road to?
Yeah. Just well, I never just say, see you later. It's more about, well, sorry, I can't help you right now. I don't feel this is the right fit for either of us. But here's a bunch of options of what you can do next. So it's never just sending them away on a bad note. It's always still providing something, some help, some advice, something so that they feel that it's not been a bad ending.
It's so good to hear, and that's the essence of my question, because a lot of people, I think, wonder at the early stage, how do I get to do these great projects? I'm really into sustainability. I want to do sustainable projects, and I think from talking to so many architects now, I think it's as much about people who you choose not to work with as to who you do work with, and really honing in and being empathetic to those people, but also quite firm and saying, well, this is what we do and this is how I can best serve the people that I want to serve.
Exactly. And to be able to articulate that for yourself and your own values and what you stand for, and to put that on the website. And I was writing a lot more blog posts previously. I haven't so much lately, not with this year anyway, with the crazy year it's been. I'd like to get back into it, but having that communication and putting that out there, most people, when they do arrive for that first call, they do say, oh, I read what you wrote and it really resonated, or I heard you in this podcast and you really spoke to me. So they
already know you a little bit.
They do, yeah. Absolutely, and they already feel aligned and feel there's that connection. So you're never having to do a hard sell, because the relationship has already started to be built.
And has word of mouth increased in that time as well? Do you think do you have to keep writing? I know you'd like to, but is writing as important for your marketing as it was when you were first getting started?
I don't know if it was about I suppose the bonus was that it was marketing, but that wasn't my intent. It was more about trying to give helpful advice, and especially when I was finding I'd get the same question multiple times.
Yep.
I thought, why not answer it once and be able to share that? So it was never really about the marketing. And certainly now with Passive House, like, there's so much more I'd like to be able to share, especially when we are answering these same questions over and over. Hoping the new role as part of the AFA board, there'll be somehow I can step into that communication education space as well, because there's no point in me doing it on my website and every other architect and designer in the Passive House space also doing it so multiple times. Why not come together and create a resource that's more useful, and or direct people to where the resources already exist. So in terms of blogging, I'm not entirely sure, but I do enjoy that side of things. But word of mouth or business coming in, it's from all over the place now. It's a lot if they've seen us published or saw one of our awards, or through a podcast, or even through social media, or through friends. It's all over the place at the moment.
Yeah, because we skipped over the fact that you moved out of Melbourne to Ballarat. Ballarat's not a massive place, is it? What's the population there?
I think the city itself, it is a city, is about 100,000 people, and then the sort of little regions around it, it's about 400,000, so it's quite small. So it is inland, about 100 kilometres northwest of Melbourne. So it's only about an hour and a half drive back into Melbourne, depending on where you need to go. We are at the moment not doing many projects down that way, because it's been enough work in the regional area, and we'll still drive 100 Ks in any direction. It's just so much easier to drive in the bush, and it's beautiful.
It's a stunning part of the world, absolutely. And it's got its own character. I mean, it's a sort of different microclimate as well from Melbourne. I guess you get more extremes away from the coast there.
Yeah, a lot of people always talk about Ballarat being old, gold and cold.
Right,
because it's an old, it was a gold mining settlement back in the 1800s. So there's a lot of old heritage buildings, and it's at the end of the Great Dividing Range, so there's no hills around, but we're kind of on the plateau sort of, so we're up and exposed. It does get a lot colder, but having said that, it's often 5 degrees colder than Melbourne, which does make a difference in winter, and it can snow, like not regularly, maybe once a year. I think this last year it snowed twice, which people think about global warming as warming the planet, but I'm well aware that with climate change the extremes are happening more. So I think we are getting colder. Summers definitely get hotter regularly at 40. Yet spring and autumn, I feel like every year they're getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Like that perfect, 22 degrees, that's that magic number. It feels like we rarely get days like that. It's either colder or hotter. And in the past few weeks, when we're not living in Passive House homes or offices, we're swinging between needing the heater on to needing the air conditioning on. Even in the last few weeks, the swing in temperature has been that much, up to 35 and then back down to 10 degrees maximum during the day.
Which, like you say, neither are ideal. So tell us about your journey from passive solar to Passive House.
Yeah, so I did mention listening to the Homestyle Green podcast back then. I was loving hearing all these stories from New Zealand, Australia and around the world of sustainability and a lot of solar passive design. And then more and more guests started to come on that were Passive House enthusiasts. And I feel like before long it became a Passive House podcast. And I loved it. I loved learning more. And this was at the same time that the Australian Passive House Association was just starting up in the first conference in Melbourne. So I joined up and got my ticket and went along, and felt like I didn't know anyone in the room, and what was I doing here? But I was just willing to turn up and have a look, see what it was all about. And then I think it must have been a year after that, a new client came along, and I kept learning and finding out all I could. I was definitely not in a position to do the course at the time because my children were still very young, and I would have had to go away for a couple of weeks to do the study because there was no online classes at the time. And then, a client came along in 2016 looking for a sustainable home, not too big, locally sourced materials, all the right things. And as part of my design process, at the end of sketch design, we often go and meet a couple of builders and try and find who's the right fit early on. And as part of that process, we went along and met with a few people, but the builder that both the client and I straight away had the feeling that he's the right guy for us was a certified passive house tradesperson, Stuart Lee. And he'd got in touch with me probably, 6 months or so earlier, just touching base, saying, I saw that you're a passive house member and you're based regionally, we should chat. So we'd been in touch a couple of times and always like meeting people in the industry. So when he came on board for this project, it wasn't a certified, hadn't been designed to be a certified passive house at all. It was not the right form factor, which has become a running joke. But it's also one of its success stories that as we went through the process and talked to the builder, and I was very keen to make it a passive house, but I had no experience. But because the builder did, we said, let's get a consultant on board, work together, see if it's at all possible to go down this path. So we got Luke Plowman on board from Detail Green. Obviously also a certified passive house certifier, but he was our consultant, and Stuart Lee from Craftsman Quality Builders was our builder, and went down that path of turning this design into a passive house. And, I'm still turning up to the conferences and all, over these couple of years, having not done the course myself, and I would stand there feeling like an imposter. And this is a lot of creatives suffer from this, and I want to draw attention to it because I felt like I didn't belong to be in that room because I'd not done anything yet, or I didn't know what I was doing, and I was, not worthy of being there. And I had no idea at the time that the project we were working on, was one of the pioneering projects in the country.
Wow.
And so the message is for no one to ever feel like that. If you're feeling that you're coming to the party late and just getting on board with Passive House now, like all of us are, Australia's, we're all behind the curve, but everyone's catching up really quickly, and everyone is so generous with sharing information, knowledge to get up to speed that, please come and join the party.
I think that's there are two really good points that, particularly in this part of the world, we are still such early days. So there's room on the bus for everyone. But the other part that you mentioned there is the generosity and the willingness to share, and that gets talked about so often in like conferences, but also the Passive House Accelerator and other forums. That unlike other arenas where you might think professionals are going to be a little bit protective about their design and their work, it seems to be the opposite. Anything to Passive House is just so keen for to share knowledge and also to talk about, kind of air the laundry as well, and talk about what went wrong and share learning from mishaps and challenges in other projects.
That's right. I've definitely found that in the community. I love that it was not only architects as well, that it's architects and building designers and builders and engineers and clients and others as well. It's everyone in there together wanting to share that knowledge and help each other, and sort of paying it forward in that way as well. It's been amazing. And we did speak, I say we, so sorry, the builder, the client, and I spoke at the last South Pacific Passive House Conference, which was all virtual, unfortunately. But we purposely wanted to share the story of the three of us together and also learning from our mistakes. So it wasn't your typical presentation about, here's a beautiful building and
look how great it is.
Behind it, here's our U values in the walls. Like, we threw some of that in as well, but we really wanted to say, here's what we learned about what went wrong and what we might do differently, because that's how we all learn.
Yeah,
and it's definitely been helpful as we've been moving into the space.
The other thing I really like about that story is the relationship with the builder, and also valuing the knowledge that the builder has. And I think traditional kind of architects, main contractor, then subcontractor, is very much seen as a bit of a hierarchy. But in passive house buildings, well, any successful building really comes down to the relationship, but also the valuing that skill and the knowledge and experience of a good builder. Because a good builder is just worth so much.
Absolutely. I've never understood how some architects, or sometimes architects, had a bad name as being egotistical or bossy, or I just don't understand this, because I've never been around architects like that in my career. I've just obviously worked with some amazing role models, maybe. It doesn't make any sense to me, because it's a relationship for many years.
Yeah.
You're working together with both your client and builder. And I'm not an expert in building in the same way the builder's not an expert in, architecture and the full holistic design experience. We've got different lenses on, and we're focusing on different things. And you're going to get the best outcome if you learn from each other and collaborate and share. And same with the client. Some of the best design decisions that we have usually come out of that collaboration with the client and their suggestions and our suggestions working together, rather than us blanket, putting it down. Here's what you're going to have. Live with it. Yeah. It's not. I don't understand how you can get ahead, or how anything can happen working in that way, or any confrontation either.
So you're now a certified passive house designer. You've got a team at Talina Edwards Architecture. How many in your team now?
Yeah, so there's 5 of us now. So to take that step back, so the house I'm talking about is the Edwards passive house, and while it was under construction, I think it was 2018, both myself and my colleague Mia went along and undertook the certified passive house training, and we passed, and we're very happy. So that house was not under our banner. It's still under Luke Plowman's, which we're more than happy with, and in fact we're working with other consultants now in that role. We may still run the PHPP on our own in the future, but we've just found it incredibly beneficial to work with consultants and contractors as our knowledge is building, because everyone else brings that different skills and knowledge to the table. So that's been really great. So that our other employees now haven't undertaken the training yet, but they're picking up so much by osmosis in the studio, and they are working on passive house projects as well. We've got a bunch of them on the books at the moment. So they're straight away saying, today, one of them saying, oh, hang on, the engineer's asking if this is going to be a thermal bridge, but it's not, is it, because of this, da-da-da. So, we're talking about all of that. Or my other employee was pulled out the PHPP to answer a question about the U values and the amount of insulation in a wall. So without having gone and done that training, they are so on top of it. I'm so proud of them.
I think that deserves emphasising, because internationally in Europe and America, that's the sort of that level of knowledge I think would be kind of expected. But even having people around you that are asking those questions about thermal bridges and even talking about U values. I mean, we don't really talk about U values here. We talk about R values maybe. So I think that just stands out as where things have got to already in Australia, and they're significant. They might seem small steps, but I think they're quite significant.
Yeah, it feels good. It does feel good.
Absolutely.
changing that way, and clients as well. So the engineers, not only my staff and our consultants, but clients as well. They're listening to the Passive House Accelerator and coming back and asking me things, and
awesome.
It's really great to see that whole the language around it. Everyone's becoming a lot more fluent. I like to say, we started out just starting to understand it, but everyone's becoming more fluent, which is really good to see.
So where to from here? Where, both for yourself, for Talina Edwards, but also Passive House in Australia?
A few things going on there. I suppose one thing I was going to mention, that this year, has been a crazy year with COVID and being back to working from home, and I've got kids who are still school age, so it was a big juggle. So I thought this year was going to be awful.
Yeah.
It's not that it hasn't been, but from a business perspective, we picked up a bunch of awards this year that were completely unexpected. It's only this Awards Passive House. We entered it in a few things, not thinking anything would come of it, and won a lot.
Nice.
Which still feels just bizarre to say, and everyone keeps joking we need a bigger trophy cabinet. They're sitting on the end of my meeting table here. I just don't know what to even do with the trophies.
Yeah.
But the reason I'm bringing that up is definitely not about having a brag, because it's just not what I'm about, but it's given us this sort of platform to feel that we're, leading in this space and have a voice and can help influence the industry more. Having that recognition, we're being asked to speak and share our story, and hopefully inspire others, because it really feels like if we can do it, anyone can do it. That's the message. So there's definitely a lot of interest in Passive House in Australia, and with the awards that we're a part of, there was a lot of Passive House projects as well being recognised in all of the awards categories. It was really, really great to see how many were starting to pop up on the radar.
And are you talking within the Passive House community or more mainstream than that?
So we have the Building Designers Association of Australia. We won awards through them and through the Design Matters, which is more Design Matters National, which is also Victorian based. There was also sustainability awards, and some architecture awards through a small practice co-op, which is Archi-Team. So it was sort of across building design, architecture, and sustainability communities that that recognition is really starting to grow. So we saw that through all of those awards, and we're members across a lot of those organisations because we see the value in the different offerings that they have for their members, but also then me being able to go back and be a part of that community. And if I inspire one person to go and do the Passive House course or to learn more about it, and then they inspire someone else, and it's how it grows. It's been exciting from that point of view.
Absolutely. What would you say to people, just to finish off, who want to get into doing Passive House projects? Maybe they're architect, or maybe not even architect. I'm not an architect. I'm an engineer. But they're sort of wanting to get into this type of work and attract those types of clients that you're now attracting. How do you do that?
Just follow your instinct there and trust that that's the right path for you. Really got to learn to trust it, because once you're on that path, you're not going to turn back. As everyone finds out, it's really hard to take a step back and try and do anything less, because it feels like you'd be negligent if you would. It's really difficult. So definitely get on that path and soak it all up as much as you can, learn as much as you can, get involved with the Passive House community online and internationally, as well as the Australian Passive House Association is amazing, and there's so much information through the website and the forums. And I have to plug the book that I was involved with as well. It's called Passive House in Australia, put out by the Australian Passive House Association, You can get a free PDF copy from the website, and it was put together by a small group of us, including myself and my colleague Mia, along with Andy Marlowe and Marcus Stang, and a small bunch of others contributed. But we put together a case study of every single certified passive house project to date in Australia that was willing to be involved in the book. So there's so much information in there, as well as pretty pictures and good stuff to get you inspired to continue on this journey.
That is a great resource. So yes, thanks for that. We'll put some links so people can find that. And there's a New Zealand version put together by Jason Quinn as well.
Yeah, so it was thanks so much to Jason Quinn for letting us steal the idea and copy the idea, and we got to steal his editor and his graphic designer as well. So
well, it's all in the flavour of sharing knowledge and getting information out there and inspiring people as well. So that's it's all good.
Exactly.
Hey, thank you very much, Talina. It's a pleasure to finally have you on the show and talking to you. And no doubt we will speak again in the future, because I think things are only going to go bigger and better from here. So keep up the good work.
Who knows what next year's going to hold? But yeah, we're looking forward to finding out. It was really great to speak to you too.
And that was Talina Edwards of Talina Edwards Architecture. She's based in Ballarat, Australia, a beautiful part of the world with some very interesting history and heritage. What did you take out of that interview, Zach?
Well, one thing is that I feel like I'm getting to really know your community here.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of familiar names like Luke Plowman and Stuart Lee, and so it's been fun to get to know this group of innovators in New Zealand and Australia through these conversations that we're having. Well,
I think there is definitely something in that. It's a small but growing community. And I think those of us that spend time in that space think that everyone's thinking this way, but it is still a relatively small community, which is a really great thing in terms of connections. But we also do have to realise that a lot of it is similar people doing some of that important early work.
Yeah. There was also now 2 weeks in a row with the conversation with Ben Adam Smith, and then the conversation now with Talina. Also the impact of the work that you're doing with Homestyle Green, and she traces her evolution from a focus on passive solar to passive house directly to I think the evolution that was going on in your thinking, right? Yep. About what it means to do high performance building and the discovery of, the kind of like the inevitable kind of move toward passive house, because it just answers so many questions.
Yeah. It came up again. I was, I think, wasting some time on Facebook, and I found myself in a discussion. It was actually a passive house discussion forum. I think it was Australian based, and there was a conversation there about somebody was asking how to work with concrete on a passive solar design, and one of the community, there was quite a few comments correcting the person, saying, this is a passive house forum. Right. And the general thread was thermal mass is less important if you get the envelope right. In fact, thermal mass is not even part of the 5 passive house principles. It doesn't play a part there. And for people who have been thinking about that, a lot of architects students get taught it's got to be facing towards the sun. You've got to have thick, heavy mass that's exposed, that'll heat up and then release that energy. And that just is not part of passive house.
Right. And there's a narrow band of climate conditions for which that works in the first place anyway.
I shouldn't say it's not part. Definitely designing for the environment, both the macro environment, but also the site conditions is really, really key. And, that plays into having a good design and laying out the windows and the orientation in PHPP.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But just that getting people away from that thought of it's all about the size of the eaves and how much exposed concrete you have to thinking about airtightness is a really big, can be a bit of a big step. And as we've discussed before, I often need to remind myself that it took me a number of years to go through that process. So we can't always expect someone to get it in a 15-minute conversation.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is funny to stumble on this misconceptions of Passive House, kind of continually. They're not going to go away entirely, but we can do our work to help dispel them. And one that just came up again for me is, Texas just went through this crazy deep freeze, and the energy system just fell apart there because all of the natural gas facilities froze. And other facilities too, but most of it was from natural gas. And there are a couple of Passive House projects that we're aware of, and friends with the owners of. So Mary James and Sydney Gladue of the Passive House Accelerator reached out to them and interviewed them about their experience of passive survivability. Right.
Yep.
And in that, kind of from that conversation, there was a whole Twitter exchange that sort of grew up around that article, and folks, weighing in and with questions like, do Passive House buildings have windows that open?
Yeah.
And it's good to be kind of shaken a little bit and like, hey, nobody knows anything about Passive House.
Yeah.
It's like they assume that these are hermetically sealed weird thermoses.
Yeah.
And that we can't, connect to the outside through operable windows. And so that's another one. But
it's also really important for us to recognize how exciting it is to have people asking those questions, because it means that they are being exposed and they're starting to get intrigued, and that's awesome. And having 185 people on Passive House Accelerator Happy Hour each week is awesome, but 185 people across the whole population is tiny. So to have people joining that conversation who are completely fresh is a really, really exciting thing. So we need to make sure we not lose sight of that too.
That's good. It's good to accentuate the positive. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
No,
well, it's got to start somewhere,
and
it does. That's where it starts. In exploring those things that people have some natural questions about, and it's great that they're inquiring.
Yeah, no, it is. And it's great that people like Talina are sharing also sharing their lessons learned. That theme is another one that came up again as
Totally.
You commented during the conversation of just, that generosity to air dirty laundry and say, hey, this is what we learned from this process, and is really valuable. And if for those who haven't seen the Al Woods Passive House project, we'll share a link to some articles about all the awards that she won for that work. It's a really cool one. It looks like it's been described as like a series of birdhouses almost. And it's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I like lots of things about that, but I'm really interested in different typologies that break away from the single family unit house with a fence around it, and everyone driving in their cars, and it sort of breaks that mold a little bit of having more units that are closer together, but you still got your private space. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to break that paradigm a little bit, which that project does. The other thing that there's lots that I like about the work that Talina does, but I really like that she incorporates things like biophilic design and more holistic design in everything that she does as a practice. And they've really put a line in the sand, as a lot of people have with their practice, to say this is the direction we're going. if you want a cookie cutter standard home, then we're not for you. So not being afraid to turn those people away, but really finding her space and finding clients who want that is really great to see.
Yeah. I mean, how many times have we heard that story from practitioners and designers who, you lose potential clients, you probably didn't want it anyway, but you gain a differentiator in the marketplace.
Absolutely.
So that like the reward is well worth the risk there.
Yeah. Yeah. And just finally, Talina's done work with a little bit of heritage, looking at the existing buildings, doing some renovations. That is really, really important work as well. Responding to what's already there, valuing that, even though our heritage isn't that long, some of our, when compared to the likes of Europe, it's still, there is a beauty there, and also something important for the community. So being able to retain that, not just from a resource point of view, which is really, really important as well, that we don't just throw out everything and chuck it into landfill, but also valuing the style, the form, and the beauty that is in part of the places where we live, and the towns and the villages, the cities that we already exist in. We need to retain that, but work to improve it at the same time.
Well said, and especially you're sneaking that under the wire because it's still retrofit month as we record this in February.
That's right. It is. We're transitioning from retrofit.
Yeah.
So acknowledge all those fantastic women in design and building. What else? What else have we got? Anything else from that chat before we move on to activities?
I think we've covered it well. I'm looking forward to seeing the next body of work from Talina. It's exciting stuff. Yeah,
and the rest of the board too. As I mentioned, that Talina's recently joined the board of the Australian Passive House Association, and there's just some really great stuff going on as interest grows, which is awesome. So what have we got coming up in the next week or so?
Yeah, so we on Tuesday, a Wednesday for New Zealand and Australia, we'll have the Construction Tech Tuesday, of course, and that will kicking off March with Mariana Pickering and Enrico Bonolauri of EMU, who are well-known Passive House tradespeople trainers in North America. They'll be talking about mock-ups and installation.
I think EMU is pretty well known around the whole world. They pop up at pretty much all Passive House conferences. Yeah,
they do.
For good reason.
They're great. Yes, exactly. They're great folks. And good point. On Wednesday, the Global Passive House Happy Hour will feature Natalie Leonard, and she'll be talking about Passive House in the mainstream. How do we get people in the mainstream new home construction market to build a passive house? So that will be very interesting.
Great topic.
And then we mentioned earlier in the intro that we have on March 8th, the She Who Constructs Summit. This is a summit that's being produced again by Mary James of Passive House Buildings Magazine fame, and now with Passive House Accelerator. So you want to, we'll have registration information in the show notes.
Awesome. And we gave a shout out at the top of the show to all our fantastic sponsors. But I also want to say a reminder to the Patreon button that we have on the Passive House Accelerator button. If you want to help support the movements in any way or size, you can do that. Where do people find that Patreon button? It's on the...
We will share that in show notes.
And I also want to, because I know this isn't front and center at the moment, but it might be soon. There's some merch, right? People can buy.
There is merch, yes, and yes, we have a store. We have an online store, so you can find your fashionable T-shirt or cap or mug.
Yeah,
we've got a tote bag. It's some good stuff.
Yeah.
Sure.
So get in there and have a look around. And there's multiple ways that anyone can support the Passive House Accelerator. Awesome. I think that'll do us for this week, Zach.
Yeah. Thank you, Matthew. That was fun.
Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.